good, good. Oh, good, good, good. We have another event that's 1 to 3 for Ellery's. All right, good afternoon. We're all in our places with bright, shiny faces. Thank you for joining us. I'm Nancy Nyland, the Special Events Coordinator for Lake Oswego Reads, and I'm delighted to see you three here, and hopefully more. We would not be able to put on these programs without great support from the Friends of Lake Oswego Library. We have the president in our midst. Thank you so much for being here tonight. Excellent. So you can support with your membership or by purchasing books or donating books to the 2 boutique locations. So thank you very much. We're in for a treat this afternoon. This program is going to be 2 hours and broken into 2 parts. First, we'll have Jenny Katz, who is an Oregon-based hazard resilient expert and community partner with HazAdapt safety app, helping people and school communities make preparedness simple, practical, and doable. And then we'll be joined by Breck Foster, who's a social studies teacher at Lake Oswego High School and the Oregon State lead for SubjectToClimate, where she connects educators statewide to the Oregon Climate Education Hub. So thank you for, for providing a warm welcome for first Jenny. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Nancy. And I'm going to kind of do-si-do around here. So, like Nancy mentioned, my name is Ginny, and I am your neighbor from Corvallis. But I am doing so much outreach this year in Oregon because, as I'm sure you guys have heard, we are facing some unique challenges and hazards this year. So I'm going to get into that today, but this is a concerning topic for all of us. But what we know is that we can get prepared and come together as a community and face these things together. And that's what my goal is today, is talk about this. So thank you for being here in person. Thank you, everybody on the live stream. If you have any questions, feel free to send them our way. But my first goal is to make sure that I'm mentioning the topics that matter to you. So before we even get going, we're going to be talking a little bit about wildfires, but is there any topic in particular about hazards or wildfires you're concerned about and you'd like to see us talk about a little bit more? We can kind of shape our conversation a tiny bit towards that.
I guess I live in a community where we have a lot of elderly people and people with wheelchairs, walkers, and all that, so I'd like to address maybe how to help your neighbors and partners that are not.
Absolutely. So addressing, our neighbors that may be using wheelchair devices or mobility devices, and absolutely, it's a great concern. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
And probably preparing like a home exterior as fire resistant as possible.
Absolutely. So hardening our homes outside, be as fire resistant as possible. And that is definitely a yearly task, right? Because things come into our yards and over time our house becomes a little bit more susceptible to embers. So we'll get into that in just a bit. Excellent. Great topics, y'all. Well, a little bit about me as we're getting going. So my background is in global health, public health, and emergency management. And I really study how people prepare, respond, and recover to all sorts of human and natural hazards. But my passion is working with local communities to help them get prepared. And that's actually what I do most often. And I work with local entities all across Oregon and the U.S. To help their communities get more prepared. And you'll see quite a few local Oregon entities here, also from Oregon, Portland and the Multnomah area. But my favorite thing in the world is really getting to interact with communities and families as we talk about their preparedness and getting them ready for the different potential hazards that we have here in Oregon. So, what you'll be seeing me talk about today is really appropriate for all ages, though, and especially for folks who have others that depend on them in disasters. And like I was mentioning earlier, this is a unique year for us. And before we really dive deep into what we're talking about, I wanted to kind of readdress some terminology here, make sure we're all grounded. When we say the word weather, we're talking about day to day. We're talking about what we're experiencing outside our window right now. And when we mention climate, we're talking about periods over time, how we see these trends of weather change. So I like to think of it like your weather is your mood, and climate is more like your personality, right? Your moods change day to day. Your personality fairly much stays the same, but can change over time. Now, hazards, this is my area of focus, are the dangers in our environment that can hurt us whenever we encounter them. And today we're going to be really talking a lot about the natural hazards, right? So we're talking about winter storms, right? We have those here. We've got wildfires. We've got severe weather, high winds, high heat. But those hazards can also cause secondary hazards, right? That are infrastructure failures. For instance, power outages. We get quite a few power outages, and sometimes we use power outages as part of our prevention for wildfires. But then even further, medical hazards and injuries that can come from these primary or secondary hazards. And then the ways that humans cope with different stressors, right, can also lead to hazards, right? So we're looking at all of these holistically because they're all connected, right? So our goal is to address today the primary ones, the natural hazards, and then we'll kind of continue to help support towards these secondary hazards. Which one? This one? That's a hurricane. Yeah. I know, kind of funny, right? That's the hurricane symbology. Yeah. We don't really get those up here, do we? Ooh, there we go. I'm just going to take a real quick sip of water. That's right. Yes, ma'am. Yep. And I tried to classify these a little bit by what we're most likely to experience here. You know, we do get winter weather and winter storms and severe weather, you know, every year, pretty often. Similarly, extreme heat, wildfires, they're quite common for us. Dust storms, maybe not as much, but, you know, we deal with these other hazards almost daily, weekly, you know, in many other areas of Oregon. So they can happen anywhere. Ooh. So before, you know, when we're thinking about hazards, and we want to take a moment and actually kind of come together and ask ourselves this question and kind of create a group sense. How has extreme weather or a natural hazard affected you or your community? I want to hear from y'all. Yeah. Yeah, remembering fires. Mm-hmm. Smoke infecting people with asthma, absolutely. That's right. Yeah, we had a very big flood just this last year too, as well, earlier this year. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, the ice storm. Trees down. That's right. That's right. Lake Oswego has a lot of trees. Absolutely. And, you know, that can cause damage to your home, can cause traffic accidents. That can even cause, you know, life and death injuries. So absolutely. And, you know, when we think about our systems and public spaces like libraries, you know, people depend on these places. And we come to these places in bright and shiny days and not bright and shiny days. And during disaster, these are hubs of resilience. And, you know, people look to libraries to think about, you know, what I should be doing. But then also when something happens, we might gather here. So libraries are really important to our communities and can also be impacted by all of these hazards. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's a great thing to mention, Nancy. Thank you. Yeah, a lot of our infrastructure all over Oregon is not quite up to earthquake par, right? And that could mean a lot of things for us. You know, and we have that constant kind of wildfire risk, earthquake risk. And this year particularly, we've been really talking a lot about wildfires because we had a very low snowpack. So when I say snowpack, who can tell me what that is? Yeah, please.
Just how much snow you got and everything will melt and gives us our water in reservoirs.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. It's how much snow we got that year, how much is lasting on our ground, and then how much melts into the ground and also feeds into our water systems and overall the moisture of our environment. And the big concern right now that we've been dealing with It was a very dry January. We did not get the snow this year that we were hoping for. And I'm sure you've been seeing the news headlines that we've had unprecedented snow and droughts that are setting us up. And we had quite a few meetings with our state level drought monitor team. And compared to historical occurrences, we do not expect recovery of snowpack to normal level during the remainder of this season, unless unprecedented conditions materialize. Now, that was Larry O'Neill, the director from Oregon Climate Service, the state climatologist of Oregon, and he made that comment actually in late February, early March, when we were first starting to really ramp up this discussion. And that unless unprecedented conditions materialize, everybody was watching for April 1st. We were wanting to see were there any additional storms coming in, and we did have some, but we also saw that those storms also washed away some of the snowpack. So, we did get moisture, but it's not necessarily sticking to the ground like a snowpack would. So these are, some of the things that we're seeing, and we're coming out of existing drought. We've been dealing with drought as a state for some time, and I just pulled this map today, so this is fresh. And this is our, snow water equivalent percentage, percent of average. So this is compared to our other yearly. And here, our entire state, we can tell, is already much, much lower. But some of these areas, 4%, 30%, 13%, 2%, right? We are seeing very low numbers comparatively across the state. And what this gives us, there we go, what this gives us is a snow drought. So that yields an early release from our mountains and lower reservoir supply, elevated dryness, and that creates an earlier and longer fire season, okay? Yes, ma'am. And so right up here, absolutely. So we're looking up here in like Idaho and Montana and Washington. They've got a little bit more snow than and moisture than we did, and we know that Washington had those big storms as well. But we just did not have that happen for us this year. So when you're looking out your window and you're looking outside to see what does this actually look like, you will notice this in elevated dryness. So there will be longer drought conditions, a higher susceptibility to other disturbances like pests that can also impact our forests and woods, as well as lower forage availability. So animals are also impacted with that dryness. But overall, the big thing we're looking at is more ignitions, right? So debris on the ground that's dry, that causes and creates fuel for these fires. So when we're thinking about how this impacts wildfires in our state, we're going to be looking at, spring, summer, and fall ignitions. We have already had our first two wildfires of the year earlier in March this year. They were contained and taken care of very quickly, thanks to we have some of the best firefighters in the entire world here in our state. But we are anticipating a higher fire intensity this year. So that's going to mean, our crews are going to be out more. We're going to need more resources. And so that's going to create a strain on them. And they're going to be starting much earlier and have that shorter window for precautionary actions like home hardening and defensive space, which is so important. So we got to get on that. If you're watching, start thinking about your defensive space today. And, of course, the higher risk of human-caused fires. And that is a big deal for us. And I'll go into that in just a second. But the impact here is not just in the ability to start a fire, but also how our ability is to fight the fire. So, our crews will have less time to do prescribed burns. That's when we schedule a burn and we have people there ready to watch it and remove some of that debris that's on the ground and lower our risk for wildfires. Our water supply is also impacted in our ability to fight fires. And water isn't the only way that we fight fires, but it is the main way that we do that. So we're going to have to be very strategic with how we do this and address wildfires. Calling in backup, when we were looking at that map earlier, and this is a bit of an older one, this is from February, we know that other states are also going to be dealing with this dryness and dealing with wildfires. So they may not be able to send crews like they normally do. And that's all the way up into Canada as well, and California, who we normally rely on. So the way that wildfire response will happen, depending on where it is in the state, normally local fire crews will start the ones to begin dispatching, begin addressing it. Depending on the size and how fast it's moving, they may immediately deploy state-level services or agencies that are volunteer or are like private entities like Team Rubicon. Once it gets to a size, though, that is unmanageable for our local crews and local state entities, then we start calling in other states and other countries and the Red Cross. Yeah. I love this mouse. Hold on one second. So, you know, even though we're surrounded by some of the best firefighting crews in the world, faster moving fire compresses everything. So we're going to be, you know, needing all hands on deck this year, not just from our crews, but from the public. Not necessarily fighting fires, but doing our part to help mitigate and prevent fires. And one thing that you need to know about Oregon wildfire risk is a great rule of thumb. If it's drier, wildfire risk is higher. And I know this is, you know, not news to many of us, right? We're not strangers to wildfires. And this first map over here, you can see Oregon has quite a history of wildfires in our state. And this is just large fires since 2000. And so we have learned a lot, we have adapted a lot, and we're doing our part to be better at fighting wildfire. I just left the Oregon Prepared Conference, which is the state-level conference for all of our emergency managers and fire crews. And I can tell you they are absolutely shoring up, bringing on more people, doing everything they can to be ready for this season. Because, you know, what we've seen here prediction-wise, and again from the state-level drought monitor, was that till May, we are forecasted to have a pretty normal wildfire potential. And we've already seen that has changed a bit since this prediction. But looking here at June, we can already tell from the National Wildland Fire Potential that Oregon is definitely set up to have a higher risk as early as June, if not already in May. And we have seen wildfires earlier this year. So this is a great estimate, but this is not a official, it will not happen earlier. But even beyond just the potential for wildfires to start on their own, because they can. Last year, we actually saw more acreage burned ignited by humans. And that can happen for lots of reasons, some accidental, some not necessarily preventing them. So we're going to really be aware of this year and do our best to not cause wildfires. But, you know, it's not just out at camping sites or, you know, the rural land when someone's doing a prescribed burn. It could be stoves, you know, gas, the way you cook outside. That can catch fire and an ember can drift, and before you know it, you have a urban, what they call a WUI, a wildland urban interface fire, right, where we have, you know, lots of forests and neighborhoods right by one each other. So, but what does this look like for Lake Oswego? So, compared to the rest of the country, we can see in this first map right here, on average, you know, Lake Oswego has lower risk than other parts of the country, which is excellent, right? And as we were looking at that risk, we can see the western side of Oregon over here definitely is not the same type of risk as our mid and eastern Oregon. But in this older map, this is from the city of Lake Oswego, we can see that there are certain areas that do have a higher risk of wildfire hazard. So, you know, even though the risk is low, it is not immune. Right, we definitely still have potential to have wildfires here, and even if we don't have the fires, you know, here we also may have impacts that we're dealing with beyond just wildfires. So smoke hazards. How many of y'all have ever felt the like scratchy throat, scratchy eyes? Yeah, definitely. And you know, some people, like children and older folks, are definitely more susceptible to that. We feel it sooner. People with chronic lung issues or other medical conditions will definitely feel that. And, you know, beyond just the smoke hazard, we're also looking at power outages. I was mentioning earlier that we have safety power shutoffs where we cut the power lines just to be sure on really hot and dry days. We're trying to reduce as much risk of spark or other types of heat causing those ignitions near some of those power outages. But, you know, this could be impacting other places and other like systems, like more absences. People aren't able to get to work or to school in the same way as they would have in normal times. And then in just general, more stress, right? This is already concern. I know everybody's feeling this stress and concern leading up to the event. Then during the events, we see quite a bit of stress and increased risk for other coping measures that may not always be very healthy. So now that we're aware, we can continue to kind of decrease that. Question here.
What does the railroad do? Because it goes right through our town. They maintain, you know, they're supposed to maintain like 10 feet on either side of the tracks and cut down stuff. Do they have any other mitigation measures that they do when they're in a city?
Excellent question. I'm just going to repeat it for our live streaming folks. You were asking about the railroads. What are they doing? Because we have one that runs right through the city. They are a private entity, you know, and I do know that many of them will take active measures to try to avoid things flying off the cars, you know, but railroad cars can cause sparks. That is a very common thing. And I would love to do more research on what exactly they're doing to mitigate that. You know, they are a private entity, so they're not necessarily always publicizing what they do the same way our state and local agencies would. It's a great question, though, because you're right. You would think so. Yeah, you would think that they'd have to report that or identify risks. Absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, one thing that I've learned is sometimes there are silos between even our government entities, let alone our private partners as well, that may have a doing risk. So it is sometimes difficult to know exactly what they're doing. Yeah, great question, though. So when we're talking about this today, we're going to talk about getting prepared. And I'm going to be focusing on the top actions that really make a big difference. You know, and this is not going to be a complete wildfire preparedness course, but this is just going to be a practical brush up on the steps that we should be having top of mind. And the three big areas I really want us to focus on today. I lost my one, but that's okay. It's first. So today we're going to be focused on getting ready to evacuate or stay inside, making sure we've got alerts, go kits, and plans. We're going to also be making sure our breathing and our body is protected from smoke. And then staying connected to your community. What does that look like, you know, on the level between us as peers, but then also between us and our government? And one of those tools to utilize is our HazAdapt. This is a safety app, and it's where I'm talking from and coming from today. And this is a free disaster and emergency safety app. And if you haven't yet, please go download it. Got the QR code right there. You can find it on the app stores or online, app.hazadapt.com. Yes, ma'am. It's free. Great question. Great question. It's 100% free, no ads. And actually, that's one of the more common questions we get. So HazAdapt was made here in Oregon, and as I mentioned, it's 100% free. It works offline, so if you don't have internet or you have sketchy internet, which some of us do, it's definitely going to still work for you. It is safe to use. Only you see your data. We do not sell or use that data in any other way. We offer 7 languages. All of our information is easy to read, trusted information from official sources. I know our librarians appreciate that. And we cite all of our sources in every single guide. This is a 16+ app because it does offer information on sexual hazards. So we do have to make sure we're rating that. But you'll find there's no trolls, no ads, and no notifications coming from HazAdapt. This is really your hazard helper in your hand. And what you'll find on HazAdapt are life-saving tools that'll show you what to do before, during, and after. It'll walk you through step by step what to do. It'll also help you get help if you are in a crisis, both from 911 and many other local and national services. It'll connect you with local safety information. You'll see that my current location and be able to find things like alert signups, live maps, and things relevant to your area. And then it'll also help you get prepared and help you check yourself. How prepared am I? And we're going to do that in just a bit.
Should you create an account? Because I know we have a lot of them, but you can get all the information without an account.
Great question. Question was, can we use it without an account? And you sure can. All of the life-saving features, so let me go back here, the life-saving tools and local safety information you can use without creating an account. When you do prep checks, you are able to do a prep check by just offering your zip code, but if you'd like to do more prep checks, we do ask that you make an account, which is also still free. Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. And as a side note, you should always be protective of your data. Be protective of your data. Great question. Is this just for Oregon? No, we are nationwide, and it's being used in every state. But we're Oregon homegrown, so I'm really proud to be here and be with our neighbors. So let's jump into evacuation ready. What to pack. right? And this goes for many hazards. This is not just for wildfires. But go kits are packed with necessities for you and each family member. And this is one of the most critical aspects of any safety plan, is your ability to escape danger and evacuate quickly if you need to. So first thing to ask yourself, if I had to leave quickly, what daily essentials would I need? Think about your medicines. Think about how you shower, how you eat, right? We want to make sure that we have those items with us and available with us if we leave. So we've got a great list here and more lists of emergency items for people and animals on HazAdapt. But really your goal is that when you get an alert, you don't feel like you've got to rush to the store and, wade through, throwing elbows at Costco to get toilet paper, right? You really want to have your supplies ready so that you can focus on staying safe. So for wildfires, thinking about not just your important documents and medical prescriptions and an N95 mask, that would be the mask we recommend for smoke, and I'll talk about that in just a second. Eye protection and sturdy work gloves. And really, the sturdy work gloves and other sturdy protective coverings might be because that may be what you have when you return back from the wildfire, and you may be doing cleanup. So you may need, personal protective equipment to help you do that start of cleanup. Now, here's a question. If you've evacuated and you've heard while the wildfire's gone, is it okay to come back? Any guesses? Good answer. Yeah, you're right. No. Local authorities will tell you when it's safe to come back, because even if they said wildfire is contained, fire crews are still going around making sure there's no sneaky hidden fires within building structures, and many structures will be unfit for inhabitants. So they will go ahead and mark if houses are safe or not and let you know it's safe to return. They do try, and it takes quite a bit of time. And so what ends up happening is people will often come back home and try to see what's going on and, unsure, can I go in my house or not? And so authorities do try to let people know as soon as they can if it is available. And they'll usually clear neighborhoods. If your neighborhood hasn't been touched, they'll let you know sooner than later. But for houses that have been impacted, they'll let you know very quickly if they can that your house has been impacted. And one way to know if you have been impacted is through alerts. Now, we want multiple ways to get alerts, and I'm talking state, county, and city. So that looks like going on to Oregon Emergency Management, our state-level emergency management, and making sure you're signed up for their alerts. As with county level, right? So that's going to be going onto your county-level emergency management website, signing up for their alerts there, and then for Lake Oswego emergency alerts. And that'll be, again, with your local emergency manager. And these alerts are going to come when there is an emergency, right? They're going to be letting you know, we're at a level 1, we're at a level 2 or level 3, right? And they use this system here. Level 1, be ready. Level 2, be set. Level 3, go now. And we want to be packed, tracked, ready to rock by level 1. So that when you get that alert, all you got to do is just get your stuff by the door and be ready to rock. So we also recommend the Live Oregon Alert State Emergency Alert Tracker, right? If you're, did I get an alert? Did I miss one? And there's lots of reasons why a phone may not get an alert. There's many different transmission modes between the official alert send and your phone getting it. So that's why we recommend multiple alerts or having a way to go and track local alerts for that area. But then Oregon State Emergency Management, OEM, has an official wildfire dashboard map where you can actually watch wildfires in real time and seeing their response to them. Highly recommend. There's an app out called Watch Duty. Have y'all heard of Watch Duty before? It's a pretty popular app right now. This is a private app. It's a nonprofit. The official board will be the Oregon Wildfire Dashboard from OEM. But we can help you find those local maps for wildfires in HazAdapt as well. So lots of great ways to stay in touch, and we recommend have a few ways to get alerts. So text, call, email, even getting a phone call, in general is great, just so that you make sure you get it. Next, we're talking about protecting your breathing and body. So in general, when we have wildfire season coming up, or even just allergy season, I'm down in Corvallis and we've got lots of grass seed in the air right now. AQI, your air quality index, is a map that tells you how much particulate, how much stuff is in the air and is safe to breathe. And a really good rule of thumb, an AQI above 100 is harmful for kids and people with asthma and breathing issues. An AQI above 150 is a sign that everybody should be closing their windows and trying to avoid outside if you can. If you do have to be outside, wear a mask. And we recommend the PM P100 or PM 2.5 filtration. So that looks like an N95, or you may have heard of a KN95. That's fine too. You can get a fancy respirator, and that's what that blue mask is, and that has a replaceable filter. Those are great, especially if you are going to be outdoors quite a bit, whether that's with your job or just what you do. But they, if you want to do that, awesome. Indoors, though, we want to have a way to filter air. Even if you close all your windows, air still gets into our house through vents or through just cracks, and we want to, as much as possible, create a clean air bubble, right? And that can be really hard to do if you have a large house or just a drafty house. So we recommend if you could only make one bubble, or it's not a portable filter, make it your bedroom, because that's really going to be where you're spending the most of your time at home is sleeping. Having a filter there, continuing to create clean air, and especially for kids, trying to keep it in places like classrooms as well for their safety. But, wildfire smoke is one of those things where if we deal with allergies day to day, or just, I think I got something, it's easy to kind of ignore. Oh, I'm feeling a scratchy throat, my eyes are kind of itchy, and you start to ignore it until it gets to a point where you're struggling to really breathe. And so if you are seeing any of these symptoms during wildfire season, if you can smell smoke, if you can, see the haziness in the air, that's a sign that you should really be paying attention and taking action. AQI maps are awesome, but they're based off of sensors, and that sensor is really gathering the air right around it. You may not be right by a sensor, and you may have a different air quality than that even just a couple miles away. That's just from your geography. So my rule of thumb is if you're feeling it, if you're seeing it, if you are, actively smelling it, you should be taking a mask or getting inside. Depends. I would say a really great day is somewhere between a 5 and a 10. Yeah. Really, really bad day would be 200 plus. Yeah, that would be the height of wildfire season. Yeah. Orange skies is usually around 200. I think I've seen 318 once before. Not here in Oregon, but yeah. Not to say we haven't had that, but I have not seen that. That's right. I know it, yeah. And mentioning pollen is really heavy this year. It is, absolutely. But also ozone, and that can happen from lots of different things like traffic or other pollutants in the air. Yeah, absolutely. So now we're going to do something fun. We're going to do a prep check, and we're going to see together kind of what our preparedness is. So what I'm going to do is minimize this real quick. And Nancy, I may need your help getting over to the HazAdapt page. Or, yeah, I guess just tell them however to share that. Yeah. And you can go to prep checks here, or if you're on the app, you'll see a big purple button. It is, yeah. I just didn't know if we can get it to display on here. And while our tech support is helping us get there, what we're going to be doing on prep checks are 3 questions. Do you know what to do? You'll be placing actions in order. Do you have all that you need? And who would you call for help in this? And I'm going to time check. Are we doing okay? Perfect. Now calling in backup support?
Yes.
Such a multifaceted president.
checks.
HazAdapt.com.
Display.
To display there.
How do you normally choose
Yeah, you
what's
have
on
to
here?
choose the screen. So how do you choose screen for your? No, it's up here. It's in your. No,
Back up
I'm
to
not
back
an
up.
IBM.
I was gonna say, you're probably sharing your screen versus the window on Zoom. Is there a way to?
Let's see. If we go back to the PowerPoint. Yeah, because we're on the PowerPoint, but I didn't know if there's a way to choose which window for online.
And you can't click right there. No, it's not.
Yeah. So when we select the screen for the projector, does that happen on this computer or it's happening here? Okay. And
Oh, maybe one of those.
no, that's WebEx. Never mind.
Can you get back to your presentation?
Then you go to screen.
I see narrator.
Pane. Narrator updates window. Next.
Oh, no.
Button. Page 1 of 6. Task
Oh my
bar.
God.
Jump list.
Close.
Scan. Narrator window. Exiting narrator.
Thank you.
Well, we know narrator's working. Oh, no worries. You know, tech difficulties are kind of one of those things. They happen. Even on blue sky days.
That's live caption. Ooh, that won't tell us what it is. Let's try it. We did that one.
Don't wake the narrator.
Off-screen live captions.
And you know what? It is totally okay if we don't do a prep check together. You know, we can, I recommend, do one on your own. You'll answer those questions and, you know, get a sense of how prepared you are. Yeah, totally. Why don't we run through one together? I know everybody's got it on their phones and they're starting to do that. So we're going to pull up the wildfire prep check. Now,
Sorry.
oh, no worries. Thank you, tech support. It was a valiant group effort. It's totally okay. Okay, so, you know, do you know what to do? And what you'll see are 3 options of putting actions in before, during, and after. So we'll do a nice sampling. Preparing an emergency kit. Do we do that before, during, or after a wildfire? That's exactly right. What about documenting property damage? After. Excellent. Return home only when authorities say it is safe. After. Yep. What about trimming branches that are overhanging your home? Before. Absolutely. Make and practice an evacuation plan with the entire household. Before. What about updating your friends and family if you are safe? Yep, and that's a tricky one because wildfires can take days, you know, and you might be out. So it's kind of one of those things, you know, when it is safe. Most of the time, though, that'll be afterward and you are in a safe place. Okay, evacuate immediately when told to do so by authorities. During. Yeah, yep. Use face and mask respirators to protect from smoke and ash during cleanup. Yep, during and after. And that's going to be actually after because we won't be really doing much cleanup during. And then when we are doing our defensible space, we may need some masks, but definitely afterward if there's ash. Okay. Using face and eye masks to protect from smoke. Absolutely. That's one of those ones that can go in either. Yep. Using fire-resistant materials for your home. Beforehand. That's right. Taking your animals with you. During. Yeah, that's right. Take all of your animals with you. And if you are a person that has large farm animals and you are unable to evacuate or you need help, check out the Oregon Livestock Council. They're wonderful. I always plug them anytime I can. So checking in with neighbors and community. That's right. So you want to be checking in with your neighborhood, beforehand, but especially afterward, seeing if everybody's okay, and making sure, that, hey, were my neighbors able to get out? And if your neighbor may have a mobility assistance need, or if you have a mobility assistance need and need help evacuating, be sure to reach out to your local emergency management. They will also have provisions to help assist your evacuation. Okay. So last few things, I'm going to rush through those. Using a scarf to cover your face. We're going to want to do that either during or during or after. If you are cleaning or that's the only thing you've got, you want to protect, against ash and debris. Knowing your area's wildfire and hazard zone risk. When do we know that? Before. That's right, before. Yep. Okay. Knowing the contact information for locations of shelters in case of evacuation. Okay. Driving slowly and keeping your windows and door and vents closed. That's right. That's right. Why do we need to drive slowly? Yeah, that could be one reason for sure, but also visibility. If there's low visibility, that's another reason why people often may get in car accidents. But I like that. You were thinking ahead. You're thinking peripheries. I like that. Paying attention to local emergency alerts. We're going to be doing that throughout the game, but especially during the event. Removing any flammable material and vegetation from under porches and decks. That's right, beforehand. All right, avoiding hot ash, charred trees, smoldering debris, and embers. That's another tricky one. You want to avoid that all the time, but especially during and after when there are smoke, debris, and smoldering embers. Okay, so we just answered that first question. We have all of our answers in there. Well done, y'all. So question 2 is a whole list, and this will be something you have to answer on your own. So what you'll see is, what safety supplies do you have around you that could help you in the event of a wildfire? And rather, this mouse and I, it's totally okay. This is the fun part. So, bonus points. Who can name some of the supplies that we've mentioned earlier that would be helpful to have? Water, yeah. Masks, absolutely. So what was that one? Oh. Fair. A go kit, yep. Copies of important documents, a fire blanket, fire resistance roofing, a phone to call for help, a couple devices to get alerts on. Yeah, space blankets. Those are great to keep in your car if you have to evacuate. You've got something there. Ooh, good one. Yes, supplies for our pets. Absolutely. Fire extinguishers. I'm just checking a couple of those off for the funsies of this. And then the final question, and this is something, again, you'll have to answer, but it asks, who do you feel most comfortable calling in the event of a wildfire? And if you are in a life-threatening emergency, who should we call? Exactly. Not calling 911 is always your first option. And very soon we'll be having NG 911 here in Oregon across the state. Yeah, that's a new big exciting thing where you can text 911. Y'all may already have that here in Lake Oswego. I don't know if that's everywhere in the state just yet, but I think it's rolling out next month. So exciting. But other entities that you might call, your neighbors, friends and family, your communities, your doctor. If you're starting to feel that smoke impact, if you're starting to see that smoke impact in your children or other family members, keeping your doctor involved, roommates, neighbors, and then there's other supports like the Partnerships Disability and Disaster Hotline, the Disaster Distress Helpline, and FEMA, that if the disaster becomes large enough, they will also be an entity that you can rely on. Okay, and that's the end of our prep check. I'm just going to add in a few of those there, and done. What is the zip code for the library? 97034. Perfect. So you'll see that confirming zip code is that last part, and that just helps us correlate that prep check answer to a local location. And then, we've just done our wildfire prep check. So well done, y'all. From our scores, we have a novice preparedness, and that is probably because I didn't select a lot of those items. But you can review your results and kind of get to see what your score was. And I recommend check it and do it again. Keep playing with those answers and keep an idea of what you might have now and what you might need. So I'm going to come on back to the presentation, which y'all have not yet left, but let me get on over. All right. That's right. So locally will be all Oregon-based, local safety. And okay, there we go. Cool. So FEMA is national. Now we do have like federal representatives that are here and part of our agencies, but FEMA won't be called unless the governor makes a disaster declaration and says, hey, we absolutely have to have FEMA come. So yeah, otherwise it'll be all, Oregon Emergency Management and then local counties. Great question. And you're more than likely to be saved by your neighbor than by an official responder. Yeah. Okay. So great job, y'all. The thing that we just did, one, you've downloaded HazAdapt, so you just boosted yourself up for immediate preparedness. We just checked our preparedness, and you're starting to see where you can strengthen and take those next steps. That's huge. Well done. And then finally, the last thing I really want to recommend is staying connected and getting involved locally. And I want to highlight two groups here. I'm sure there are more, but one is PrepLo, and that's going to be a local community-based group that is really working to help get community and neighbors prepared. And then the Lake Oswego Fire Department has a community emergency response team, and this is for people who want to take that next step and get really involved and be part of that emergency volunteer. You're not going to be getting called out to fires, but if a disaster happens here, you may be helping out with shelters. You may be helping out with getting preparedness supplies out. So I recommend if you've got the time and energy, join your CERT. You will be more connected, more prepared, and have a connection into the network. I think so. There are, and they may have adjusted that a bit, but yeah, you can usually do most of it within a week, the training. Yeah. And that's really the final tip I want to leave you with is the most important thing that you can do to be prepared is not what's in your garage or what gear you have. It's really being connected to your community members. Because if you don't get the alert, it's probably going to be your neighbor that says, hey, are you still here? You need to go, right? If you don't have something, it's going to be your community members that'll usually be there to help you have that item. So PrepLo, CERT, OEM has a 2 weeks ready plan. They also have a whole volunteer network where you can actually be somebody who talks about being 2 weeks ready for your communities, local leaders. It's wonderful. But more resources that you can get connected to with all of these entities. But also coming up next is going to be Breck from Oregon Climate Education Hub talking about all these incredible resources for individuals, families, educators, for many different disasters, but especially for climate-driven hazards. And that's all I've got today. Thank you so much for paying attention, and I'd love to take your questions. And well done getting prepared today a little bit, y'all. Yeah. Any questions or thoughts? You did. You did. Y'all did a beautiful job. Well, thank you so much. The question was, what is the most important item to have in your kit or in your repertoire besides water? Kind of depends on where you live. If I had to put all my money onto one thing, it'd be a phone so that you can get alerts and making sure that you're getting that message. Because if you just don't know something is coming, it catches you by surprise, and then that's the worst. Probably after that, I would say, a way to get out, a way to evacuate if you had to. Yeah. Everything else, if you never had a go bag or you were like at work and you didn't have your go bag with you, wherever that secondary place is where they are evacuating you, they may have supplies there, but it's always best to have your own kits, right? Because you'll know your medications, you'll know your personal wants and needs. So yeah, that's what I would say. Absolutely, and that's a great suggestion. Having a go bag in your car You should have one in your car, your house, your work, and even working with your local other groups like libraries and churches to also say, hey, what's our plan if people show up here and and they don't have their go bags, right? That's a great thing to ask. And a lot of entities can ask their local governments to say, hey, we're an organization here people may come to in disaster. Can we get supplies just in case we're, helping people? And usually they have stuff. So I recommend, ask, check it out. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I've heard about radios like NOAA, weather alerts and all that. Do you have
Yeah.
a radio that you recommend people have?
I do. Well, and I don't know if I've got it listed on here, but NOAA does have a specific radio system, the NWS, National Weather System radios you can get. Many commercial radios will actually have that kind of preset on there. The one that we recommend in HazAdapt, and you'll see it actually in Wildfire under promoted products, is a wind-up radio. Yeah, so that you don't have to use batteries. And they've also got solar ones, but I mean, we live in Oregon, so sun isn't always guaranteed. So, having a nice wind-up one that'll help out there.
I'm trying to look for ones that I can buy a set of 6 and I have good ones for the kid family.
I love that.
A lot of them aren't long enough range, for
Yeah.
the house.
Yeah.
Not me yet.
That's a tricky one. And, I love that idea of like having walkie-talkies or something in between houses. The range can be really tricky. And, the other aspect is during a disaster, our official lines are going to be taking precedence. And so when you are thinking about calling your loved ones or keeping in touch, text is always going to be the best option versus calling and creating traffic on the lines. Yeah. Great thought. Yeah. Also, preparedness items make a stellar Christmas gift. So getting y'all's Christmas shopping ready. Yeah, early, mid-Christmas, right? Yeah. Well done. Thank you, everybody, so much for your time and attention. I think we're going to take a small break before, 2-minute break. Grab a drink of water. Yeah, thank you.
Yay. All right. Well, thank you for sticking around for the second part of the presentation. And this QR code will take you to a document that I curated that has a bunch of resources from the presentation today. And we'll also be looking later at the Oregon Climate Education Hub, maybe live, maybe not, depending on technology. So yeah, thank you again for being here, and to the LO Library and LO Reads for putting this event on. My name is Breck Foster, and Nancy already introduced me, and Jenny kind of set me up well for this presentation for the second half this afternoon. So I sort of wear different hats. I am a full-time teacher at Lake Oswego High School, and then I also have a part-time job working for SubjectToClimate as their state lead, doing outreach for teachers in our state. And I have been doing this work with SubjectToClimate for about 2.5 years, but I've been working in sustainability and climate education for about 7 years now. Started at Lake Oswego High School creating a green team and becoming involved in the first strategic plan sort of initiative that incorporated sustainability into our district strategic plan. And through that work, it's helped me connect with a lot of people in the community, and so that's going to be one of sort of the big themes of this presentation. I've worked a lot with Lake Oswego Sustainability Network, Oswego Lake Watershed Council, et cetera. And then also, I don't know if you're familiar with, but this year, or in 2025, the Oregon passed a climate education bill called HB 3365, and I was part of that advocacy group, Oregon Educators for Climate Education, that worked for about 5 years to get that passed. So I am excited to be here, and I also wanted to just kind of think of some weaving and connecting. Jenny, I met through an Oregon State University professor who knows both of us, and said, hey, I think you two would have, something to talk about. And so that's sort of what brought together this presentation where we joined forces. And then also I was inspired by Emma Patty, the author, because I had read her book and also learned that she's a climate journalist, and that also made me think of sort of that connection between hazards and climate, because I think there's parallels between them that I know she draws upon as well. So I am going to perhaps later talk a little bit or show you a demonstration of the Climate Education Hub. But let me give you a little more context for the role that I'm here today, which is SubjectToClimate. So SubjectToClimate is a national nonprofit, and they have a platform that has over 3,000 resources for educators to use. It's free, like HazAdapt, and everything is vetted by scientists and educator approved. And they partner with states to create state-facing hubs. So the Oregon Climate Education Hub was a partnership between OECE, or Oregon Educators for Climate Education, and SubjectToClimate, and it launched back in 2023. And since then, we've had, I think, about 10,000 folks visit the site. Our mission is to empower all educators to easily and effectively teach about climate change, justice, and action. And so I'll be talking about ways that you might use it as well in your own life, even if you're not a teacher. And I also will be doing a demonstration of it later. So one thing I wanted to think about, just sort of to bridge the connection between Jenny's presentation and mine, is Jenny did a deep dive into climate hazards, or climate-related hazards. And I'm going to sort of talk more broadly about climate change education. But what we have in common is that notion of connection and how important it is to be educated and connected to your community, to be able to have sort of that knowledge that will prepare you in times of crisis, and also that will lead us toward more sustainable and safe and healthy and create better well-being overall. So one of the first things that So one of the things we're really thinking about here tonight is systems-related thinking, and one of the ways that I want to, and I think Jenny is as well thinking about, is sort of between the individual getting ready and then also sort of having systems in place and organizations, governments that are supporting in partnership. So when a lot of the examples I'm going to use today are from my work at Lake Oswego High School as a teacher. And so one of the things when we first started a green team is I realized I didn't know very much. I'm a social studies teacher, so I've had to learn a lot about environmental and climate education myself. We partnered with Oregon Green Schools in Clackamas County, and I learned early on that to focus on sort of ways that something like a school can support climate action rather than putting it back on the individual. So we said we want to reduce plastic use, single plastic use. We want to reduce waste. And so the Clackamas County said, hey, you should install more water stations. We see that you only have a couple at your entire school that serves over 2,000 or approximately 1,500 students. And so we got a small grant, installed more water filters and water stations, and now it's just part of our culture. Yes, kids do bring single-use plastic, but kids are routinely going out, refilling their water bottles. And so that was a little bit of awareness for me to think about that there are organizations out there that can support you financially to promote these types of systems. And it also was an early lesson for me of, instead of kind of making kids feel guilty, like, hey, you're using a plastic water bottle, it was, hey, we need to have a system in place that provides opportunities to hydrate when you can without that single-use plastic. So like Jenny, we are connected deeply with a lot of other organizations. SubjectToClimate has its own partners, and then at the state level, the Oregon Climate Education Hub is connected with a variety of organizations that I think kind of show some of the scope of who's out there thinking about climate education and who's working toward similar things that we're working toward here today. Another spark for this conversation was this teacher guide, so SubjectToClimate, among its many resources, creates teacher guides where they curate resources from the hub, from their platform, and this one was created in partnership with American Red Cross, and I actually printed, in case there were any kids here, some samples from it, but there's a variety of resources ready to go. One of the series from American Red Cross is called Prepare with Pedro, and in Spanish, Prepárate con Pedro. And it's also offered in other languages. They have a whole video series, ebooks, printables. This is just one example. There's also for middle school students, they have a podcast series that's highlighted here that features kids in different communities across the country who have done research and created podcasts around natural disasters that have struck their area and sort of how the community responded. And it has a climate focus because that's one of the things we'll be thinking about is sort of that connection, like Jenny set up for us, between climate change and increasing extreme weather events and natural disasters. Okay. All of our resources on our hub also are they're sorted by age level so that they are age appropriate. We're thinking with younger kids, we're just creating that connection to nature, and as they sort of mature and are ready for tougher subjects and thinking about issues, we see that the state standards progress along the way. And that's another thing that I'll feature, which is that everything is connected to state standards. So I always want to give a shout out to the other resources that are out there, just as Jenny did. So HB 3365, which I mentioned, is Oregon's climate education bill, which I can talk a lot about, but I won't today. And SB 13 was passed in 2017, and Oregon has our own tribal history, shared history. And I always feel it's important to talk about the partners who are already doing this work, teaching about sustainability, climate education, place-based learning, geography, which are all interconnected topics. And the topic of resilience itself is not new. It's something that many communities have been practicing for generations. And so really thinking about how, as climate educators, we're building on community knowledge that is already out there and that we can learn from. Also, when we're thinking about climate education, we're focused on the inequities that are part of systemic injustices in our history. As a history teacher, this is really important to me to think about, and so I make sure that climate education really has that focus. But anyway, if you're not familiar with Tribal History, Shared History, it is a great resource produced in partnership with local tribes and statewide tribes and Oregon Department of Education. They have professional development, they have curriculum. It's super fantastic, and so I want to give a shout out. Also, last plug is that in a history class, we're thinking a lot about how where we are today is due to a lot of practices, such as we study in my history class for modern world history. We talk about colonization, we talk about extractive capitalism, we talked about fossil fuel use, and so all of these are interconnected issues. And just that's sort of a theme too, is just thinking about how everything is connected and making that more transparent for kids. So what are we going to be talking about for the next 30 minutes plus? We are going to be looking at some big questions around how climate education can help us build the knowledge, skills, and social connections for resilience, preparedness, and community-centered climate action. So we're going to be doing that through a couple of lenses. We're thinking about climate emotions and connection. How do people process fear and build connection before, during, and after emergencies? Tools and learning. We're going to be thinking about what resources will help us teach climate science, solutions, and justice. And then finally, we're thinking about community action. How do we bring this back to our communities? How do we work alongside our communities? Past, present, future is a huge part of my teaching and in general, but thinking about that lens of what we can learn. And I know it's the same in disaster preparedness. You're thinking always about what we could have done differently. And often it comes to having those systems in place, having people educated and prepared, having public communication systems ready. Students are finely tuned to the events that are happening to them that you all mentioned earlier. They've experienced the heat dome, ice storms, wildfires, and so this is an entry topic that they're ready to talk about. I've interspersed some of our Earth Month talking slides. These are just sort of conversation starters that a teacher could use. And Jenny already mentioned that what is the difference between weather and climate. So maybe you can turn and tell your neighbor if you remember the analogy that she gave of weather versus climate. All right, nice. I heard it. Weather is mood and climate is personality. Fabulous. So yeah, we all are interested in the weather, right? We're checking our apps. I think a study showed that Americans on average check the weather about, the 60% of Americans check the weather at least once a day. 20% check it several times a day. I'm maybe in the I'm definitely in the several times a day. But one of the things we don't talk about as much is sort of how that weather, and especially extreme weather, is connected to severe, severe weather events and extreme weather events, and increasing hazards and disasters. So one of the things to think about is how can we use weather, for example, as an entry point to getting kids to talk about geography, geology, climate science, and as an entry point also to think about the political and economic systems that are creating those patterns over time. As Jenny said, just, in the last couple of years, we've had times when our schools have been delayed, have been closed. I know just about a month ago, there was a tree down and a bus was delayed. Luckily it didn't hit the bus, but it did create a road closure. So kids are talking about the ways that weather is impacting them. And I think that as educators, that's a really great way to just sort of enter into a conversation with students and also recognize that that's something that they're concerned about. There's worry, and it's sort of an unknown of what's going on. So Jenny raised that question about how has climate change impacted your local community or state. This is another way to bring kind of big, scary issues just down to the local level. So learning from our past experiences to strengthen future response and recovery. So the heat dome of 2021, how many of you remember that or lived here during that? Yeah. So that was monumental for a lot of us. For Oregon, there were 123 deaths, according to one source that I read. Many of the affected individuals were indeed elderly, living alone, and many did not have access to working cooling systems. So this is sort of, I highlighted this with my students when we were trying to grasp that understanding of like inequities with climate change, because that seems to them sort of like, what does that even mean? And I said, well, you were more likely to die if you had one of these, attributes, and or didn't have access to something like a cooling system. And so that made kids really open their eyes. They also didn't realize the scope. And this is just in Oregon, the number of deaths. But if you look at the larger, Northwest, there were many, many more. And those were humans. We also had huge impact on trees, on animals. So it was a lot. Jenny shared this article with me, which I found really interesting. And it highlights some of the ways that rescue teams were able to, response teams were really able to rescue and do their great work. But they also identified areas for improvement. And one of the areas they felt was public communication, just the need to have those systems of communication. And I think that goes back sort of to thinking about those people who maybe didn't have a way to communicate what they were feeling, didn't have that ability. They also said something that is a theme and something that is told over and over again in the resources that I've engaged in around this topic, that social connection can save lives, and that those who are more isolated are more likely to not, be saved or to be able to have ways to get themselves out of a situation like this. In the same article in the Oregonian, there's an emergency room doctor here in Portland who said, we need to start talking about how she said, in addition to the response, the emergency response, she said, the bigger issue is we need to look at the underlying issue, which is climate change. And I'm just reading a quote from her. Her name is Dr. Bori Kia. She said, we need to start talking about how we can improve our behavior, our actions, so that we can prevent it from worsening. And that's in reference to climate change and the related climate disasters that we are seeing. And so storytelling is such a big thing, and talking, communicating. So I want to emphasize those. There's a great organization here also located in Corvallis called Climate Stories Project, which if you haven't heard of them, they're great. And they do trainings on how to tell your climate story. And the reason I say climate story is because that's a great entry point, again, to connecting with others around this topic. So talking. So Dr. Catherine Hayhoe, who you probably have heard of, the climate scientist. May I pronounce that correctly? Yes. She talks about climate being a climate solution. And so maybe turn and talk to your neighbor for a moment. And what is it like talking about climate change with your friends and family? What are some barriers? And there is a new person in the back if you want to turn and talk. You are the new person, yeah. Yeah, turn and tell your neighbor. Yep.
About it yet, but I'm thinking I need to do that when I see him in May because I want to know what he is perceiving, hearing in his age group. You know, what's,
Yeah.
I want to listen to what he has to say. You know, so bring it up with my family.
It seems like Gen Z is really concerned about things.
Yeah.
Really looking for change
Mm-hmm.
and what we can do to take care of things.
Mm-hmm.
Give Gen Z a lot of credit.
Yeah. Gen Z. Yeah. 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 Mm-hmm. Yep. Yep.
So, yeah,
Yep.
my kids are Gen Z. And
Yeah.
they are not having kids. And they are, yes, people are really cutting back on
Mm-hmm.
childbearing.
Mm-hmm.
Because they don't have faith, there's a future, a proposed
Mm-hmm.
future.
A utilization of resources. You know, we just don't have the unlimited supply of resources that we need.
Yeah. Wow, there's, it's a big topic. It's a huge topic, yeah. And I heard everything from it's hard to get started having those conversations because it does go to big things so quickly, right? And also I heard that desire to have those intergenerational conversations and thinking about how important that is. And, you know, again, this is connecting to big emotions is part of this, and we don't always feel comfortable or feel like it also begs us to think about, like, we start to feel maybe guilty or are we doing enough? And all of those things are coming up. There's a great short film. It's about 5 minutes by Climate Courage Schools out of Britain or out of the UK. And it's a clip about, it's a short film about the weather and about sort of this storm brewing and these local ladies kind of conversing about, ooh, what's the weather going to be and what are you going to do and the da-da-da-da. And the boy is kind of watching this storm brewing, and at the end he says, you know, like, why are we not talking about climate? Why are we not talking about climate change? Because we do love to talk about the weather. That's such a big conversation. But we're really not connecting it to climate change, even though really that's the way that we will experience climate change the most is through those changing weather patterns and the disasters and hazards that they are bringing upon us. So just thinking about, even if you're having those conversations, that's moving us towards something. So really urging us to have climate conversations in big and small ways. And there's a lot to learn and to feel comfortable about doing that. And you have to feel safe with the people you're having those conversations with. There's a lot of, there's a lot to this. So UNESCO identifies climate change education as something that leads students to understand and address the impacts of the climate crisis, empowering them with knowledge, skills, values, and attitudes to act as agents of change. And we're really thinking about, in SubjectToClimate, I'm thinking about knowledge of science, right? And so as a social studies teacher, this is not my forte or what I studied, but I am able to, with professional development, with resources, I'm able to integrate climate science into my history classes at a basic level so that I'm able to make that interdisciplinary connection for students. And understanding community is also super significant. This is looking at how is it impacting your local community, what action is being taken. And then, of course, empowering solutions. So when I first started saying I needed to teach climate in my classroom, I really was doing a lot of that kind of gloom and doom. And I recognize now that I probably scared a lot of kids. And I've learned over the years that we do want to be, we do want to talk about the problems, but really experts say that it should be majority solution oriented and action oriented, so that students are not left feeling with that gloom and doom. So when we're thinking about climate education and resilience, we're thinking about how climate education can build resilience by helping us understand, prepare, make sense of events, manage emotions, and take action, right? And support one another. So all of this is ultimately setting the stage for sort of having those foundational skills and knowledge so that we can connect the dots between what's happening in our world, and then sort of both learn how to take action with resources like HazAdapt, knowing that we are going to have wildfires. Maybe they're not going to be here in LO, but we will likely have smoke. We will likely have poor air quality. So how are we integrating that into our schools, into our classrooms when appropriate? And then also we're connecting to the bigger picture of like what is sort of driving these changes, and how can we, not necessarily always just at an individual level, but really more importantly at a systems level, how can we create changes to mitigate and adapt to climate change? So there's all sorts of definitions of resilience. And so I got this definition of community resilience. So we can think of resilience, right, in terms of like a structure being resilient, or being able to bounce back from something. I wanted to think about sort of community resilience because we're at a community-wide event and we're connecting that to things that will happen to our entire community potentially. So really we're looking at how do we withstand, recover, and learn, and how do we do that in a way that focuses on well-being, equity, community, collaboration. So I want to always focus on climate education within recognizing my larger community around me, and also how it connects to other parts of, for example, in my school. Earlier, Jenny maybe put her foot in her mouth when she said this is a resilience hub, because we didn't know that it was potentially this building would not be a good resilience hub in the case of an earthquake, at least. It could potentially for other things like a wildfire event or something where you came here to get out of the smoke. But River Grove Elementary School, which tomorrow, by the way, is hosting a sustainability fair if you're in the area and want to stop by. They are certified as a resilience hub. They have, just all sorts of features, which Tony Vandenberg from Lake Oswego School District could tell you all about. But that is one of the things that Lake Oswego School District is doing, is they're thinking with that sustainability lens when they're building new, when they have new construction. And that is in big part thanks to the LO community who has supported bond measures and invested in resilience and sustainable structures. So I just want to give that shout out. So that's at the infrastructure level, but that's really not something I know much about, so I'm not going to talk too much about it. Yes, go ahead. No. Yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. So in case you didn't hear that, those live streaming, that this can be a cooling center, and it has been in the past, which is wonderful to hear. Thank you. So I know I'm giving a lot of frameworks, and so part of that is just to say there are so many different ways to think about and teach climate, and there are many best practices. And so like anything, we can learn through accessing resources, reading, engaging. NAEE, which is NAAE, North American Association of Environmental Educators, has a booklet that they put out in 2024, I think, which gives best practices for engagement in climate education. And just again, I'm not going to go through each of these, but I just want to sort of, looking at them, see that we see a lot of patterns showing up across different frameworks. And so just sort of thinking about these patterns of what is important across sort of different organizations, government, non-government, thinking about how we should be working toward solutions collectively. So one of the ways that I can highlight from my own school experience is we have partnered, our green team has partnered not only with other clubs like the National Honor Society at Lake Oswego High School, but also most importantly with Oswego Lake Watershed Council to do semi-regular Ivy pulls and at our high schools. So those Ivy pulls are always also coupled with some instruction and learning from our Oswego Lake Watershed Council, who talk about something, again, I have to admit, I was really ignorant about a lot of this stuff before getting engaged in my school in this area, but she talks about carbon sequestration and how when we're pulling Ivy, we're really trying to save the trees. And so now it really kills me every time I drive through Lake Oswego and I see these gorgeous trees covered with this gorgeous ivy, but I know that it's basically choking them and will kill them, and it's hard once you see it. Okay, anyway, sorry. But anyway, kids learn about that and they take action and they feel really good once they know they're not just getting dirty. It's fun to be out with their friends pulling and getting dirty, but it's also that they're doing something to help the environment. Yeah. Yeah, we did. Oh, did you go to that? Oh, that's so cool. Yay. Oh, that warms my heart. That was at the last LO Reads. That was during, yeah, it was, yeah. Yes, yeah. Oh, I'm so excited. So yeah, so it was, I misspoke when I said the last LO Reads. It was the one during, like right before COVID. And what happened is we had this wonderful, it was going to be Elizabeth Brush's book, and the theme was around climate change. And so we had the panel of students that spoke, and then the Green Team had just been established and was just getting really amped up working toward a lot of things within the school, but also pushing the school board to adopt sustainability as a strategic plan goal. And so I'll show you the end of that in a minute. So I really appreciate that you brought that up. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Well, and we were part of the Oregon Green Schools, which we did like a whole audit and sort of identified goals. And Oregon Green Schools since then has sort of collapsed, but there are many other models for kids to pursue, sort of setting goals for themselves and then working toward that, which is really important, I think. So thinking about climate emotions, that's another thing that comes up a lot when thinking about resilience and climate education. So this graph was just released from the Climate Mental Health Network, and I was at one of their presentations online and was impressed with this graphic. So essentially we have disconnected and disengaged on one side and overwhelmed and shut down with paralysis on the other. And I have seen my students be sort of at both ends of those spectrums, right? Some who are like, meh, I don't think about climate change, I don't think it's real, or it doesn't bother me, they say. Or I have other kids who are like, it's such a big topic, I really am worried, and I can't even do anything because it's basically, like we heard earlier, right? People are thinking, I don't want to have kids, or I don't this or that. Well, we really want kids to be in this space, and when I think of the Green Team students that you saw then and my Green Team students now, that is really where I see them. They are aware of issues. but they're drawn to the green team because they're in that position. I think they come already in a way with that, and we are a small and mighty green team right now. But my question is, how do we get more kids to that point where they recognize the issue, which is real, but they are able to take action? And so that's sort of one of the big things that we are thinking about, and that I'm working toward. So this is my classroom, and I know, okay, we're doing okay on time, about 20 minutes. So I teach modern U.S. history and modern world history, and I find that there's a lot of great ways to connect topics such as the Industrial Revolution or so this was from in my U.S. history class, which are 11th graders. We were looking at a unit on sort of economic development since the Gilded Age through the Progressive Era and beyond. And I found a wonderful resource on the Oregon Climate Education Hub, which featured from MIT, which featured two wildfires, the Great Peshtigo Fire, I think it's 1871, which is right at the beginning of the Gilded Age, and the Chicago Fire. They both happened on the same day. It's a fascinating story because they had totally different experiences. The Chicago Fire actually did burn down their one library that they had, which was a private library, and out of that they built the first public library in Chicago and it was paid for by a wealthy donor. But anyway, Chicago had a lot of attention on it, whereas the larger, more devastating in terms of numbers fire was in the rural area of Wisconsin, and really didn't get as much help, didn't get as much attention, and people were sort of less prepared in certain ways. Anyway, there's a lot of lessons to learn. I'm starting to ramble, which I told myself I would not do. But what I want to connect to is that I was able to think about to myself, okay, I'm studying sort of industrial development in the United States during the Gilded Age. How can I connect this to climate? Because I really like to do that, especially because our unit was featuring environment and the economy. So because I think those pair really well together. Anyway, so I went online and I looked, and sure enough, I found that Gilded Age lesson plan from MIT on the hub. And then I also knew already about this wildfire lesson, which features, it was written by an Oregon teacher, and so it's place-based, it's around Oregon, and I sort of merged them together so that we looked at a historic example of a fire, talked about how that, sort of a lot of the impacts around it and causes. And then we also talked about a current or a more recent fire that I think it's based on the 2020 Alameda fire. And so this was, I think it was an engaging lesson for kids because the topic of fire is interesting. They're like, oh, we're talking about wildfires in our history class. Why are we doing that? And what is this? How does this all relate? So anyway, SubjectToClimate, which powers the Oregon Climate Education Hub, creates its own lessons. I think we have, I don't know how many hundreds of lessons, but we have 15 Oregon teacher-created lessons, and all of SubjectToClimate lessons connect to social-emotional learning, and so you're always going to see emotions, an opportunity to talk about, like, how does this make you feel? We're also going to always have issues around justice. How are some people impacted differently than others? We're also going to have always, like, climate science and some connection to understanding the environmental aspect of this. All of the lessons are really great for grab and go for educators because they all have the same format of inquire, investigate, and inspire. And I wanted to just spotlight, in case I forget to do it later, thinking about this question. So as I led this lesson, I posed the question, like, how does this make you feel? Like this, we were talking about this topic, and it was a lot. And I have read since then, because I'm a lifelong learner, I'm always trying to do better, that it is best if you are talking about climate emotions to give kids an opportunity. I didn't force anyone. I never would force someone to share something. But I also said I should have given them also an opportunity to write it down or just to self-reflect. So instead I got some hands raised. But I guess what I'm getting at is that when you are talking about something like big emotions around a topic like this, it can bring up for people maybe some sort of trauma if they've had some experience. And also it's just a best practice to not sort of assume that people feel comfortable or safe in a space to share how they're feeling about something. And so there's a lot to learn. We also have professional development, which helps you better navigate those difficult conversations that come up. But that being said, it is important to acknowledge as a teacher, like, this is heavy stuff. And also that we're not going to solve all the problems today. That this is slow work, it's ongoing work, it's collective work, we're in it together. But I tell students that in a classroom what we're doing is we're learning, we're educating ourselves, and we're thinking about how we can take some of that and perhaps turn it into civic action or civic engagement. All right, so the last thing, this is or not last thing, but this is kind of a lot of words up here, but state standards, if you're not familiar with them, are sort of the guidelines for what we should be and can be teaching in our classroom. So Jenny mentioned earlier that climate change at times can feel politicized, or it can be politicized. And so having all of our lessons and all of the resources on the hub are aligned with Oregon state standards. And climate change already is in Oregon state standards in health, social studies, social science, and in science. And so the bill that just passed in June of 2025, or that was signed by the governor, is going to sort of elevate and expand the standards in future adoptions. But we already can be and should be teaching about climate change in our classes. All right, a few more things to get through. So more of these frameworks. Again, I just want to sort of show you some tools, and this will be an opportunity for me to pause for a moment and let you guys talk. So I went to a presentation by Beth Haley, who works at the Oregon Health Authority, and she works with climate and mental health of youth, I believe, in particular. And she shared this circle of concern. And essentially, the big idea here is that a lot of what we're talking about today is worrisome, right? Climate change, wildfires. And it can get us to that point where we're disengaged or overwhelmed. So we want to move kids more toward that action and concern, but also able to take action. And so part of that I have learned is that we need to let students know that we have a lot to think about. They're hearing about it even if we're not bringing it into the classroom. But we also only have so much control ourselves, and that we're not going to stop global warming by, me riding my bike to work or something. But that actions do matter, and that we do have control, not only for our own habits, but also for the systems that we can change. And that's that circle of influence, which I think is really important. So thinking with kids, what are some ways that you can influence others to create larger change? So maybe turn again, we're kind of a small group, so just we can talk as a group. Can you think of a way that you could influence someone else, maybe in your community, around this issue? Something you feel like you can't maybe do alone, but you could do it by influencing someone. How would one influence someone else in a positive way? Any ideas?
As a library, this is such a great way to showcase information on and having wildfire resources, even children, having anything available.
I agree. Yeah. Yep. Yep. Absolutely, absolutely. And I think you're the one you gave earlier, having those students go and speak in front of at City Hall. It impacted you and made you connect to the district. Yeah, yeah. Yes, yeah. Yeah, I remember that. Yeah, that's right. I do remember that was cool. Yeah. Oh, good. Okay, so I'm going to maybe kind of skip some of this because I do want to just give an opportunity to look at the hub. But a lot of this is similar ideas. Climate anxiety, which we've talked about. Again, this is a short video that I found on the hub from Now This Is Earth. And one of the biggest things it talked about too was sort of that social connection, working with others, getting informed, advocating. And so, advocating again could be simply calling your local school and saying, hey, do you have a climate action plan? Hey, do you have a school safety plan? Who do you partner with during emergencies? What kind of climate education program do you have? One of the things that gives me a lot of joy is working with students. So these are my Green Team students this year. They took part. One of my big things is just to say yes as much as I can. So if there's an opportunity, I'm like, yes, let's do it. So Future Climate Collective is a local organization that works with youth, and they hosted a climathon. My students got involved, and they actually got first place out of 6 schools in the region. But they're able to, sort of, again, they're in that sweet spot of realizing that they have agency. These are students talking to the school board about composting at our school and food waste. Speaking of the school board, they are looking at the next version of the strategic plan, and there are opportunities to speak over the next month before they kind of finalize what that strategic plan will look like. But there was a lot of student voice involved and community voice in getting the sustainability on the first strategic plan. All right, and here we've gone to Salem. We've gone to Salem to advocate for climate education. This was from this student, James, is part of a statewide organization called Our Future, and they also work with youth, and they organized a lobby day to look at this bill that was asking fossil fuel companies, large corporations, to pay more to build resilience in Oregon. So asking those who are sort of polluting the most to give money to support infrastructure and resilience actions here. It did not pass, and they were disappointed. But I said that's also a lesson, is that not everything passes. The climate education bill, we had to do it twice before it passed. This is the strategic plan, so I'm really proud of that round of Green Team students who you met 5 years ago, who helped advocate for teaching and practicing sustainability, including accelerating students' ability to combat climate change. So this is built right into our strategic plan. So it is absolutely within your control to be able to say, hey, this is important. I want to make sure this is elevated in future strategic plans. I love this quote from Adrienne Mary Brown: what we pay attention to grows. So teaching about climate change in schools and giving kids opportunities for actions and solution tells them that we know this is important, right? I use the Sustainable Development Goals. Is anyone familiar with them from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? There's basically 17 goals that were set in 2015 for us to achieve by 2030. Now that's only 4 years away. Zero hunger. I mean, we're zero poverty. We're not going to reach them in 4 years, right? But they are absolutely a framework, because as a history teacher, it can get a little depressing to be like, oh, there was imperialism and there was this that happened. And but the framework is like, hey, this is sort of a model for where we want to go, and climate action is one of those goals. But some people have said, you know what, how do we achieve the Sustainable Development Goals? We know problems like climate change. We know the solutions. There are solutions that we could be mitigating and reducing our greenhouse gas emissions. But we don't have often the political will, right? Or we don't just know how to get there. And so there's a recognition that we actually need to work on some of our skills, recognizing sort of our own agency, connecting to others, collaborating with others, and acting, right? So I really love these. They're very new. They're still being rolled out. But I think they're a beautiful complement to the Sustainable Development Goals. They also mirror a lot of these other frameworks around social emotional learning, just for the sake of time. So Oregon is the only state who has adopted transformative social emotional learning that should be taught K through 12 across subject areas, sort of like climate education. The goal is to have a lens whereby students are being exposed to all of these skills so that they can be agents of change. I'm going to because we are running out of time, this is students last year going to make little nature journals for Earth Month, sparking joy being their own teachers, right? Here's a map that we created of sort of community assets for students to be like, who is it that's doing this work? And expanding beyond sort of what we normally think of for sustainability and climate resilience. Let me see. I'm really afraid to look, but let me see. Oh, it's working. Yes. Okay. So this is the Oregon Climate Education Hub. In my last 2 minutes, I would like to just show it off. And also, I would love it if anyone here wants to jump on this, if they have a phone just like you did with Jenny. So let me give you this before I click to there. So up there is a QR code, and this is free. Again, if you register, it simply means that you're able to save information, save items, but you absolutely do not need to. You can also just go to OregonClimateEducation.org. Should I leave it up there one more time? And essentially, there is professional development, there are teacher resources, but you can use this yourself. You are welcome. What's great about it is instead of simply Googling a topic, you're going to know that everything on here has been vetted by a scientist and an educator. We have our own teacher-created lessons. We also have teacher resources from over, I don't know, it's like several hundred different trusted providers. And you can search easily by a topic simply with a universal search like that, or you can also go in by subject, grade level, standard, etc. So here right away I found a video on natural hazards. And again, sort of, you're going to see a broad type of opportunities. There's professional development opportunities, free PD, all sorts of things. And I really encourage you to use it as a resource. And if you know someone in a school, say, hey, are you using this? Or if not, what are you doing for climate education? So thinking about this call to action is just how can we all be climate educators and leaders? And that might look differently. It might be having a conversation with someone in your family. And it might be going to a school board meeting. It might be having a conversation with HazAdapt. So I appreciate you all for being here today. Some events that are happening locally. This slideshow I will embed in this resource guide, which is somewhere. I will share it with you to maybe, are you able to share out to people or no? Okay, that would be great. Super, because I have a whole bunch of resources that I want you all to have access to. All right, well, thank you. Thank you. Okay, just pause there. Thank you, everyone. There is. Yes. Yes, there is. Yep, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah, I curated a whole list of things, so I will definitely make sure that you get that. But I know that we are done, and I don't want to take up any more time. Yeah. It's right there. Okay. Yeah. So it is a range of emotions, but I would say the most common that I hear is just sort of, the anger, and also just feeling like, why should we even do anything? Because, and I really, that's when, to me, it's a call to action for us as grown-ups to be like, well, we're doing this work too. This is not just a burden for you all, but it's something we're doing alongside you. And then again, like, hey, it may sound not very exciting, but did you know that pulling ivy or installing a water station is actually a climate solution? So I think once they realize it's all those little things that build up to big changes eventually, and they start to realize, it's something tangible I can do, then I think that really empowers them. So, yeah. Well, thank you. And I'll stick around afterward if anyone wants to chat. So, thank you again.